hello everybody, and welcome to the 9th episode of ASTROPILLED, and the first episode happening on Twitch. So, hello, new viewers on Twitch. Normally we do these over Discord, but we're trying this out. I am so excited that we've got QC with us to go over his chart and talk a little bit about, especially, the acid tweet, because that's definitely a big story for you right now. You've been the main character on Twitter. So I'll start off by introducing myself, have maybe, and then we'll turn it over to you to ask a little bit about your experience with astrology, if any, and, what you're interested to get into. So my name is Saddle Sood, or Sadal, or Salad, or Way, whatever you'd prefer. And and I have been in software engineering, now recently into management, for about the past decade. 3 or 4 years ago, I discovered astrology, was very skeptical, and wanted to know more about why people were into it, and then I just fell down the rabbit hole. And ever since, I've been applying methods of computation and statistics to study astrology more deeply and understand exactly how it works. Maybe I'll kick it over to you.
Yeah, in my regular daily life, I am just starting out a career as a lawyer, but a huge other world for me that I love to explore is anything that has to do with subjectivity and magic and the occult. So I'm really fascinated by the intersections between modern religion and occult practices like tarot and astrology and other magical traditions. So being able to share the bridge between those two worlds that I have found, between the sort of mainstream professional materialist world and this more fascinating, more mysterious, more archetypal realm, is something that I really cherish. And so I'm happy to have QC here today.
Nice.
Yeah, absolutely. So QC, I'd love to hear, what is your experience or knowledge of astrology thus far? A little bit about your background and what you're hoping to get out of this session.
My experience, thank you for the introduction. I have basically no experience with astrology. I have heard other people on Twitter explain a few astrology things to me. I have sent some people my charts, sometimes as a way to flirt with them. I think the first time I generated my chart was because I was flirting with Maybe. And thought it would be funny to send it to her, and that's what I did. So that's mainly been my my experience with it, but I feel open to it. Also, I have read some stuff by John Michael Greer, who's an occultist who writes a really cool blog that probably people who know more than I do about this stuff are very familiar with. I like his writing a lot, and he has a lot of interesting things to say about astrology and magic and all this other stuff. And I'm open to it. I have almost no experience, but happy to be what's the word? Flooded with stuff. See what happens.
And there usually is flooding.
Yeah.
Cool. So I'd love to hear also a little bit about your background, and is there anything you're particularly interested in focusing on today?
Well, a little bit about my background, as in just a little bit about my life trajectory.
Yeah, just where you're coming from. What's brought you to this moment in life?
What has brought me to this moment? Ooh, I like that. Okay. So I used to be heavily involved in the rationality community, and I was also a grad student in mathematics. So it was a very sort of logical, thinky mode of being applied to all the things. And then I eventually got fed up with that. This is compressing a much longer story.
Yeah, absolutely.
And learned a bunch of stuff about, first of all, just about feelings and emotions, just a bunch of getting in touch with my feelings in various ways and crying my eyes out, a bunch of things, and that was really good. And then I just kept going in that direction. All right, this feels really juicy. This is great. What else is like this? And then it turns out there's a lot of other stuff like that. There's meditation and sort of spiritual practices broadly, and psychedelics, and also stuff in the realm of magic and astrology and tarot. And that's the bit that I have the least experience with, but it all feels kind of like one interconnected cluster of I might stuff that is sort of beyond the rational mind or whatever. And okay, great. There's definitely a lot of that stuff, and it definitely seems really important. So here I am.
Yeah, totally. Okay, and then in terms of, so we're thinking probably about your relationship with your own emotionality, about sort of this transition from rationality towards a more, you might even call post-rationalist or possibly post-rationalist adjacent mentality. I know that's a loaded term. I don't really know what it means anyway. I'm just joking around. But cool,
no one knows it. It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. So let's just dive right into it then. So what we're looking at here is your natal chart. You've sent it around, you know what it is, but to summarize for guests, we have here a 2D projection of the 3D space of the sky at the time of your birth. So this here represents the horizon. This is the ascendant or the sign that was rising on the horizon at the time of your birth. It is generally said to represent the moment of the first unassisted breath you took after you came out of the womb. Everything below the horizon is beneath your feet from the place you were born, and everything above the horizon is in the sky at the time of your birth. So you could actually look up and see the moon at this time near the horizon. You could see Mars, Saturn, depending on observability. So one thing that's important to note here is that we don't actually have your exact birth time. We know it's roughly accurate to within an hour. I do think that you are likely a Gemini rising, so I think we're in this range. But if you were close to another sign, we might have to ask you some questions to really pull out, hey, what exactly, how do you feel about this form of how you project yourself? But just knowing you as a person, you're very talkative, you're very open, you're very expressive. You're a Twitter person, you often need to talk. I think many of us do, and that's very much a Gemini rising sort of thing. And some of your other stories also around your family and history, I think will be reflected also by this house placement as we look at it. So nice. Gemini rising people, as I've touched on, the rising sign often colors our personality in an overall way as an unconscious projection outward into the world and how we deal with the world. And we often don't even realize that we're doing it in some ways. You are more likely to, because you also have your moon in Gemini, and a moon in Gemini is also very talkative. It is somebody who needs to deal with their emotions. That's the moon, by talking, communicating, relating ideas, stuff like that. Yeah, exactly. So that's you for sure, right? And then your sun is it's the sun, the literal sun, and your sun sign is, as you probably realize, but just to get on my preacher box a little bit, is that the sun sign is just one part of your entire chart. And a lot of the time when you have this moment where you read something, you're like, oh, I don't relate to this at all in my sun sign, it's often because you actually have a whole bunch of other placements, and they might be distributed around the sky or around the zodiac. And when you sun people overall, Leo people overall are very expressive. They're very generous. They're very focused on the joy of life and experience and what life has to give us, essentially. So I think that does fit with your personality. You have this underlying vitality underneath all the talk, right? Because that's very much Gemini. And I don't mean that as a criticism. I love that. Yeah. So what we see here is somebody often, we start by looking at the big three to kind of get a larger picture, but then the other placements will sort of fill in the rest of the story, because each of these placements rules a different part of your personality, or your subjective experience.
The big three are sun, moon, and rising?
Exactly, yeah. So we've got the rising here, your sun right here, and then your moon right here. Then we also have the personal planets. So Venus rules aesthetic expression, also how we like to be valued, how we experience love and joy. Yeah, it's often going to be very related to the type of people that we enjoy spending time around. Then you've got Mars. So I'm just going to go through the planets real quick and then kick it over to Maybe. So we've got Mars here, and Mars represents your sense of initiative. It's how you get things done. It's what you do. It's how you go about accomplishing a task, essentially. We also have Mercury, which rules how you think, how you process information, how you learn, and how you express it as well. And then we get into more of the outer planets, Jupiter generally ruling how we experience growth, joy, a sense of progress, and also our sense of generosity and where we, care for others and ourselves, is generally going to be represented by the sign of Jupiter right here. And then we have Saturn, who is kind of like the daddy of the chart, the disciplinarian. He is the planet that will tend to represent where we feel responsibility, where we feel duty, where we feel drawn to have to do something, essentially, where we're like, oh, this is, this is the strict disciplinarian. This is the dad who gives you $1 every time you mow the lawn. Like if you do it 100 times, you don't get a bonus. You just get $100 because you did it 100 times. Good job. So those are the planets overall. And as we go in, we'll dig into house placement and then also just some more of these outer planets as well. But I'd love to kick it over to maybe, because you've seen this chart before, and I'd love to know, what are you zooming into immediately while looking at this?
Well, one thing that stands out to me is that Mercury is in its domicile in Virgo. It's rejoicing there as the evening star Mercury, rising after the sun. So it's in a really, really strong position, and it's also just coming off of just separating from its degree of exaltation. So Mercury has a really strong influence in this chart. It's also enjoying like rulership over a lot of the other signs by things like term. So it really reflects to me that you would end up having this life story of being, a super math guy, like Mercury in Virgo, like that near his degree of exaltation. That's what would be really exciting for him, is pursuing math and doing that kind of detail oriented, disciplined work. It's also in the 4th house. So being that Mercury, as we talked about, rules sort of like your thought and your communication, your learning. It also is interesting to see a 4th house connection because that section of the chart represents the area or reflects the area of your life that has to do with your roots, your past, your family. And so for people who follow you on Twitter, they know that you have spent a lot of time like thinking and communicating about your early childhood experiences and the way that you feel about your past, and talking about your roots and the way that you're relating to them in the present moment. So to see Mercury near its exaltation in its own domicile in the 4th house, doing math and talking about its childhood is so on brand for that placement. And that's naturally something that my attention goes to right away in this chart.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder how that lands with you as something prominent about your chart, QC.
The funny thing, I think the word that caught my attention the most in what you said was when you described math as something disciplined. It actually has never felt like that to me. I think it's easy for someone to get the impression that it's like that math is this like very rigid, maybe almost authoritarian pursuit, and it's never felt like that to me. What it's felt like is more like I'm going to take a moment to really be self-indulgent about this. It's like, first of all, it's an opportunity to like get in touch with some kind of like pure unfettered truth with a capital T. You know what I mean? Like you can write down like a nice little proof for yourself and just be in some sense utterly confident, like more confident than you could possibly be of almost anything else that the thing that is true. That's like kind of cool. It's like, oh man, this is like just a chunk of the Platonic realm that I can just summon into being by like scribbling some stuff on a piece of paper or on a chalkboard. That's like pretty whack. That's like pretty wacky.
Yeah.
And then, so that on the one hand, and then the experience of doing math for me is often creative is not quite the right word, but there is a kind of creativity to it. There's like there's something I'm interested in trying to prove, and I'm like, I can think of like maybe 3 different strategies that could work here. I'm going to pick this one because I like it the best. It's like amuses me the most, and I could pick a number of other strategies. It's like a video game. You're like, I could play this game as like a rogue or a cleric or a mage or whatever, and I'm just going to like pick the one that suits me. I'm going to like pick this. And similarly, there's types of problems in math that I quite enjoy, where there's like different kinds of tools you can bring to bear on the problem that will all ultimately lead to the same place, but in quite different ways, and you can kind of express yourself in how you choose to get to the place that the problem wants you to go. So it's never felt very constraining to me. There is a kind of constraint in it, like you can't, you start proving things that are false, and you're going to have a bad time. but they're constraints in the same way that like the rules of a game are constraints, like the rules of a video game, and you can still have a lot of fun. And in fact, the constraints are what produce the fun. The constraints make the fun possible, because the constraints tell you where you're having fun. You're having fun here. You're not having fun somewhere else. You're having fun here. Anyway, that was very long. That was longer than I expected.
That's great. I mean, honestly, every single thing that somebody that comes onto this show says often shows up in the chart. Because, like, you're describing this entire thing, and I am just honed in to the fact that you have, so we're going to pull in a bunch of stuff all at once here. You have this grand trine happening in the Earth signs to your Mercury. And a grand trine typically represents that there's a natural, often the word used to describe it is a genius around the nature of the planets that are in the grand trine, and also the element of the planet's signs as well. So this is an Earth grand trine with Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn all being Earth signs. And so you have your Mars in Taurus, which will tend to indicate an ability to apply effort in a very steady way over a long period of time. Like Taurus people, when they work, like they get started and then they don't stop. They just keep going. They just run off, you know? But it's often like very like disciplined and like careful and thoughtful and like a very methodical sort of way of going, because it's a fixed sign. And the fixed signs, and Taurus especially, likes to relax. It likes to take its time. There's an element of pleasure to things that Taurus people do as well, and I think that that I hear that in the way in which you describe playing with these things. And it's also interesting because Saturn, which is, you know, this planet that is often related to domination, strictures, restrictions, not being able to do stuff, you actually have it in trine to your Mercury and to your Saturn. And what this will mean is that there is a productive relationship to your sense of discipline, responsibility, duty, like what the rules are that Saturn rules, as it relates to how you think and how you operate in life and how you do things, how you get things done. Another thing I want to point out that's fascinating, because we actually just saw the same thing with Becoming Critter on the last episode, is that you actually have your Mercury at the point of elongation. But unlike Critters, who was in as a rising star, morning star, yours is an evening star. And when we say that Mercury is at its longest elongation, due to the way that the sun moves, or rather, sorry, too much astrology, due to the way that the Earth moves around the sun, when we have Mercury either in front directly between the two or on the other side, you get the effect of retrogradation. So due to this, we're at the exact point where Mercury, I believe, let's see, what's it about to do? I believe it is just about to slow down and turn retrograde around this time. And so I would have to animate to double check, but the position is what's most important here, because when Mercury is a morning star, it lends towards a mind that is more Apollonian, more focused on, you know, like bright, clear, idealist sorts of worlds. It's very like, you know, like divine masculine. It's not really focused on feelings or shadows or things like that, which is super interesting because you have this extremely analytical Mercury. It is in Virgo in its exaltation. It is, you know, it gives you, or I shouldn't say gives, but it represents and correlates to your ability to work on like, you know, complex math for a long period of time. But at the same time, this mind is concerned with depths. It's concerned with more to do with the underworld. It's more about the psyche. It's more about, it's like the literal opposite side of the Apollonian archetype. It is, I forget the exact term, but it's all about kind of like the more subversive depths of ourselves in terms of when we process information.
Dionysian, is that the...
I don't think it's Dionysian. It essentially represents... Oh, it's more like... not Chiron, but Charon or Charon. It's the passenger of the dead. He's the ferryman who brings people between light and, you know, life and death. And so it is often about the transitions and the dark places of the mind, and like where the mind tends to go is going to be more fixated on things that feel that are more feeling oriented, that are more intuitive, that are more focused on like what is actually happening behind the surface, what's the myth, what is the underbelly of things overall. So it's a very interesting combination with your Virgo Mars.
Oh, I like that a lot, actually. Thank you for that. So one thing that, the first thing that brings up for me is like, this was kind of my attitude when I was in math also. Like I'm on record as a high schooler, I won some competition thingy, and someone asked me like, what are you really interested in mathematics? And I was at 17, the age of 17, I said something like, I'm very interested in like finding unexpected connections between different branches of mathematics, which was a thing I was already seeing a little bit. It's like, oh, sometimes there are these things that look really different, but then you like dig deeper and they're like kind of connected by this tunnel that is hard to see on the surface in mathematics. And that was very fascinating to me. I was like, oh, there's like some kind of like fundamental unity behind all this stuff. There's like something underneath them that's like the real mathematics. And I want that stuff. That's the stuff I want. So
yeah,
in that sense, that's been like a lifelong theme, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's
I
interesting
love
to reflect on that.
Yeah, and I love that you use the term tunnel specifically, like something underground, you know, and especially, I mean, it's so funny because our signs and our elements often show up in how we use language, and you have such like a strong earth trine, and you're thinking about like ground, tunnels, structures, things like that. Like, I love that.
Cool. Yeah.
But yeah, I'll turn it over to, oh, did you have something else? Okay, maybe I'll turn it over to you for what you're seeing next here.
Yeah, one thing I want to touch on a bit, just because I saw Chachu chuckle at it a little bit, is that there is this Mars on Taurus in the 12th house, and it forms part of this grand trine that we've talked about that includes Mercury and Saturn. But the one thing that I notice about the Mars in Taurus is that it also has this really interesting opposition with Pluto and Scorpio, and a lot of the things that I just heard QC reflecting about picked up on this long-term integration or compromise that this planetary configuration is kind of demanding from him. Oh. So you just talked about how like you're really interested in the hidden interconnections that have to do with mathematics, and that what you like saw yourself as working on when you were working on that was uncovering those things. And with Pluto in the 6th house in Scorpio, that really resonates for me. Scorpio is very similarly interested in things that are hidden or mysterious or deep or spiritual. So I wouldn't be surprised even if you had a particular interest for maybe the ultimate truth of like sacred geometry or something like the truest truth and the mathiest math and the most spiritual spirituality, like that feeling of finality or being willing to break things and put them back together. Actually, this is something that I see as something that's going on in these two separate stories of Mercury in Virgo and Pluto in Scorpio. Mercury in Virgo is the kind of person who wants to take something apart and put it back together to understand it with that kind of depth. And Pluto in Scorpio is the kind of person who wants to take something apart and put it back together to improve it or change it or transcend it in some way. So there's these sort of dual motivations for you that make you willing to risk breaking things or experiment even though you might fail, and these kinds of things. So I see those in these two stories as well. But this Pluto who wants to work on, taking math apart and putting it back together again to see if we can understand it or transcend it or get some sort of spiritual truth from it, is opposing this Mars in the 12th house, in Taurus. And one thing about fixed signs, and I have a lot of fixed sign energy, is we're about enduring, we're about sustaining. But if we haven't started, we're not really about initiating.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yep.
Does that make sense? So I feel like there was a part of you that found maybe a little bit of a lack of resonance around the read of Mars and Taurus as somebody who can work on something for a really long time and sustain a long-term project.
It's funny because I don't think about myself in that way. Yeah, that's true.
And
I left grad school because I kind of felt like I couldn't do that, but
right. Yeah, sorry, I'm stepping on you. I'm so excited.
No, it's okay.
You
It's
go
okay.
ahead.
It's just funny. It's funny for me to reflect on because there are ways in which you could describe the last 4 years of my life as being engaged on like one project single-mindedly, which is like what the fuck is going on with my feelings and shit. Like if you sort of tell the story of my life in in those terms, then in some sense I have been very committed to this one project. It's just funny because it doesn't look like, if you just sort of like just put a camera on me, it doesn't really look like that's what I'm doing most of the time. Most of the time it looks like I'm fucking around and doing nothing in particular. And so it's hard for me to like, I couldn't make a strong case to a skeptic that I was focused on one project that whole time. Like a skeptic would be like, it seems like you were just dicking around. Like, yeah, yeah. I mean, yep.
Yeah. And I mean, that's so perfectly also represented by the 12th house placement, because the 12th house is all the house of mysteries, of reassemblage, as well, as a way I like to think of it. It's kind of like the final step in a big long-term sort of cycle where you find yourself dealing with like what's left and then putting those pieces back together, rearranging them, things like that overall. So I mean, I absolutely love that.
Nice.
So
okay, yeah.
I would love to start talking a little bit about what brings us around to the tweet thread, because I think that's where we're going to get a lot here, because I mean, I've kind of been stepping around it a little bit, maybe has too, because like it's so loud. It's very, very loud, and I love it. So it is essentially, if we look here in the second house represents our possessions. It represents money. It represents the things that we have, own, gather, etc. The second house being in Cancer, you can often describe the houses based on the sign they're in. So the fact that your second house is Cancer means that possessions and money are very much about emotion for you. They're very much about feelings. They're about, especially with Cancer, the past. It's about what has happened before, you know? And I think that's absolutely incredible, because you also have here Jupiter in Cancer in the second house, and you're very open about, you know, who you are as a person and how you express like your money stuff, you know, like it just comes out, you're very open about it. But also, like when I think of Jupiter in Cancer, Jupiter is in its exaltation in Cancer. So essentially that means that it's extra strong, and Jupiter is this drive to grow, to feel expansive, to have these like big experiences. And Jupiter in Cancer has a little bit of an element of like, I get to do whatever I want because it's an exaltation planet, you know? Like it really doesn't give a shit. Like it is a ruler, like it is a king sort of planet. That's what exaltation often means. But I especially love it in Cancer because it's not just, you know, that emotionality and finding, literally a meaning of Jupiter in Cancer is finding growth through exploring our inner world and emotions. Like that's one way you can view that. But when you also think of Cancer, it's also about nurturing and taking care of other people and trying to protect other people, especially people that are closest to you, that are people that feel like family. And one of the things that comes to mind there is, I remember seeing one tweet like a couple months ago where you were saying like, I'm never going to apologize for expressing my feelings or for caring about other people for worrying that they're going to hurt somebody. You know, and like I just love that because on a personal level I agree, but also on another level it's described by your Jupiter in Cancer so well, especially in the 29th degree, where you could say that like as it's leaving the sign it has the most to say about its experiences, so to speak. But then you also have your Chiron in the second house as well. And Chiron is the planet, or sorry, it's an asteroid that represents the wounds or painful experiences that we've had through life, that we've learned from, and it becomes a source of eternal wisdom, essentially. And, you know, for your experience of possessions and money is tied up with your personal suffering and pain and with trauma and with other things that you've gone through and experienced. And in the process of processing it, you're able to turn it into something that you can express. And eventually, I think that the big story for you is you're probably going to become a teacher about the realm of possessions in some way based on the Chiron, you know? And that's not necessarily like this is your life path, but like that's kind of what you are already doing automatically and what I think you'll continue to do throughout life. I also really like that you've got Venus here, and this is fascinating because you and Becoming Critter both have the same thing of a 29th degree Jupiter next to your Venus that is crossing a sign boundary, and it's just funny and interesting to me that we've got two in a row like this. And then Jupiter in combination with Venus will tend to be about, you can often read conjunctions, or when a planet is in one place, as being the combination of the two energies. So for you, joy, expression, expansion is going to be related to Venusian topics, whether that's like money or art or pleasure or like sensual experiences. In Leo, it's going to tend to be more about like being seen or expressing yourself in a very like leonine way, where you like want to put yourself out there, you want to share things, and that feels really, really, really good to you. And it's and it's also interesting, if we take a more mundane view at it, and I don't normally do this, but because it's so loud in your case, like one way you can read a second house placement of Jupiter and Venus is like literally you just are going to have money, like you're just going to be lucky with money, like straight up, like sorry, but you're stuck with it.
That's very funny.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
And then and then we get over to your 8th house, and I hope you're ready for this because your Saturn and your Neptune are in your 8th house, and the 8th house rules other people's possessions, other people's money. It rules especially our parents. It is literally the house of inheritance, and it's in Capricorn, which is amazing because this is your entire story, dude. Like of what's been happening lately is like your Capricorn 8th house also is you could say means that the dynamic of inheritance or gifts from others or the things that you pick up from other people will tend to be in a more austere sort of way, or in a way that is more emotionally reserved, or in a way that is like pulled back, because that's Capricorn. Capricorn is this planet that is emotionally detached in the name of business or success or like getting things done and accomplishing things. And I think it's just so loud that you have this Saturn of responsibility, duty, restriction in opposition to your Chiron in your 2nd house, where it's almost like this gift becomes a burden. Because of the Saturn placement there, it's normal. Like, it's natural that you're going to experience anything that has to do with the things that other people give you. Not anything, but, especially the major things in life, you will experience as a burden. And yeah, holy, we're going to pull up that transit because it looks fucking incredible. But I'll pause there. Yeah.
So the thing that impresses me the most about this read is I got part of it in March from someone else on Twitter, from Erotic Acid, and I want to see if I can pull up the exact quote because it's so good. Now that, like, in light of recent events, it's just really, really funny. I'm going to see if I can pull up the exact wording though. Okay. Take a second, but this is another astro person on Twitter that I was like I sent my chart to in a plausibly, undeniably flirtatious way, and she had interesting. Oh my God, where is it? She had interesting things to say about it. It was cool. Oh my God, I can't find it. I might have to send a message.
It's all
there
good.
It is.
Oh, you found it?
I think so. Yes, great. Okay, so in March, I sent her my chart, and she said, she asked me something like whether I'd had money troubles. I was like, no, I'm actually like very financially comfortable. Mm-hmm. And she said, this is funny. You have one of the most auspicious aspects for finances. It is exalted Jupiter tightly conjunct Venus. That just means wealth. Though I was taught wealth is still subjective in astrology, I noticed Chiron there, which is a dwarf planet often associated with pain, and thought maybe there would be difficulty or loss associated with getting your material needs met. But apparently not. That's great.
Yeah.
and then now, in light of recent events, I'm like, oh yeah, difficulty or loss associated with getting my material needs met. Yep, like that's.
Yeah. And I mean, the interesting thing too is that in the 8th house, like the 8th house is also the world of kind of like our personal underbelly, like our inner psychology, like sort of the deepest things that we're hiding within ourselves. And so Saturn there, like it's kind of unavoidable, and like other people won't appreciate the dynamic within your life, right? Because they're not you, they haven't grown up the way that you do. You know, like I think we saw that in a very public sort of way. And yes, there will be a recording of this after, if that's what you're asking, Irving. And so I think it's such like a perfect story. But the other thing that's really interesting too is that you have Neptune and Uranus there as well, which will often have to do with Neptune is the planet that rules dreams, fantasies, also fears, and sometimes delusions. So there can be kind of like a confused relationship around the things that come to us, but also they can just manifest very suddenly out of nowhere. That's very much Neptune's deal. It's almost like I often describe it as when it's in positive aspect, it's kind of like a dreams come true aspect, or when it gets conjuncted or touched positively. You also have Uranus there in Capricorn, which is another interesting thing that has to do with sudden revelation. It has to do with personal change. It has to do with the rebellion within ourselves. So it's almost in a way like you could say that with this combination, you have so much stuff that's coming at you from your 8th house, but there's also this dual impulsion to not see it just for what it is, and also to want to resist it, to want to rebel against it, to want to be like, no, I don't need it, I can do it myself, you know, blah, 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 all that entire dynamic. I've said a lot, so I'll pause and turn it over to Maybe and yourself.
Sure.
Is there anything that resonates with you that you want to chime in about now, or do you want to get a little picture of like my reflection on this whole
Sorry, I'd love to hear more from you. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, it is really interesting. The thing that your friend has said about the Jupiter-Venus conjunction in Cancer is like, she's totally right. It is laughably wealthy. And so that is really funny, and that she identified its co-presence with Chiron is like strange. It makes a lot of sense too. It in the way that I conceptualize the 2nd house, 8th house axis and the way that it has to do with money, I view it in terms of security in the second house space and exchange in the 8th house. So it's like what resources we have that make us feel secure in the 2nd house, and what we have to do, what we have to sacrifice, what we have to trade out of those resources with other people in order to navigate the social world. And so for you, I can see that Chiron might speak to the way that you weren't able to feel secure, even in this place where you were like resourced in many ways. Does that make sense? It's like there's there's this disconnect between financial security and security in general that you felt really sharply.
And can I comment on that?
Yes, please do.
This feels like an Asian American cultural thing. Like other Asians know what I'm talking about immediately. They're like, yep, that thing where your parents give you money and they don't give you love. Like, yep, that's the one. And I think a lot of people who don't know what that's like, just like couldn't relate to that aspect of it all. And I didn't go into it in very much detail because there were just in the thread, there were so many directions I wanted to go. And I was just like, I'll do it later. And that was one of them, was just this, like, I did in fact feel growing up like my parents didn't give a shit about me, like about me as like a person. Like there were so many ways that they just like constantly ran over like my feelings and my beliefs and my wants. They're just like, yeah, none of that stuff matters. It's fine. You just do what we tell you to do. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. That sounds terrible. In combination with all this material abundance, I was very, very well cared for. They bought me lots of things. They bought me lots of toys. They bought me lots of books. They, funded lots of opportunities. I went to summer programs and stuff, like extreme material abundance. I never had to worry about any of that stuff at all. And I still didn't feel like they really like understood me as a person or cared about me as a person. So that combination is, again, like I think many Asian Americans specifically, maybe just Asians generally, I'm not sure, are like very familiar. Like, yeah, I know what you mean when you say that. And maybe other people don't know what that is like, and they're like don't have like a concept of how that could feel bad, but it's like it actually feels really bad. It's awful. Like
Yeah, yeah, and to some extent, just to speak personally and generally, I feel like there's almost an extreme distortion that happens because you like don't understand, and it disconnects your relationship to what wealth means because it's not associated with love, and it feels like hate, or it feels like not hate but indifference, right? Or like we're just using this money to exert control over you. That's another way you could read this as well, which is that Saturn from the 8th is literally a control mechanism coming into this Chiron placement. Just one potential way to read that. But overall, I think like what you've said so well encapsulates how one of the reasons I love astrology, which is that you can see the insides of the person in such a way that you absolutely would never have empathy for somebody if you come from a different background, just reading the thread or coming from the outside, right? Like if you don't have the same understanding.
That's cool.
So I would love to pull up the transits, I think, of the thread. I think we're at that time. Would you all like to do that?
Can you say very briefly what that... I have a vague guess about what that is.
Yeah, so we're going to look at what the sky looked like at the exact time of the tweet and see what happened.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
And you have the time accurate to the minute, so that's pretty good.
I do, yeah. So I think it was July 15th at 3:44 p.m. my local time. Where were you in the world when you tweeted that, if you don't mind my asking?
Where was I in the world when I tweeted that? Was I here? I was here, and I don't know how specific you want me to be. California.
California's good.
It could be Bay Area. Be a little more specific.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, sweet. So then
I've been given advice that I shouldn't be too specific about my location, so people can't find me.
Probably a good idea. Just in case, precaution. So Bay Area is 2 hours before CST, right? So, okay, 1:34. I don't think it matters a ton, really, since we're dealing with the ascendant. But, and also I need to change the page to use this Twitch tri-wheel. And there we go. Okay, that looks better. That's less awful to look at. Okay, so what we're looking at here, and the second wheel, we may find some interesting stuff. I just pull it up as a default. So in the first wheel, that is your natal chart, as we were looking at before. In the second wheel, this is what's called a progression, and or a secondary progression. And that is a technique where for every year that you've been alive, including fractional years, you progress the chart forward by 1 day. And so your secondary progression, if you're 30, if you're 50, you'll be basically casting a chart for your exact birth time just 30 days later or 50 days later or what have you. And it's supposed to show the larger themes in life that progress over time and take a lot of time to come into play. And then the final ring is just the transits of the moment of like what exactly was happening on this day. So I've been looking at this and just like kind of losing my mind because it's incredible. So first off, like I like to start just by looking at the context to the natal chart. So first off, on this day you had the sun, and as a transit, I often relate the sun to shining a light or bringing attention to something. And it was literally conjunct your Chiron, which represents this point of pain and learning in your second house. So like first of all, we have the transit right there on the day, like within like 30 degrees or 30 minutes, which is incredible. And then we have both Mars and Venus on top of your sun. Mars rules initiative generally, so this contact to your sun would have probably made you feel like you had to do something, like you had to express something, you had to get something off your chest, especially relating to like who you are with your identity. And then finally, Venus as a conjunction there, Venus has to do with money. Straight up, like it's a money planet, especially in Leo. It is very much about money. So you've got this combination of like, oh, I need to do something, I need to express something, I have all these thoughts happening, and then you've got these two transits right there. There's another interesting. Oh man, there's so much happening here. I just need to like slow down and take a look again. Oh boy. You would have had the moon moving over your progressed placements of like Venus, Mercury, and Sun. It's just kind of like an activator of, this money topic again, this mercurial topic, like your thoughts, how you express yourself. But it also probably would have touched your Mercury on this day. So that might have been the first ping of like, oh, I have this thought bubbling up and I should do this thing. The other piece that's interesting too is that you actually have Neptune is approaching a trine with your Chiron, and Neptune rules drugs a lot of the time. And also, Neptune is like Neptune is a very slow mover. So this is kind of like a pivotal sort of moment in your life as Neptune was coming over to retrograde and make that exact trine there. But what's also interesting is that you also had Jupiter retrograding too around this first degree, and I thought I saw an interesting Jupiter contact. But so one of the things that I thought is that you probably are born a little bit earlier than the birth time that you gave us. And the reason for that is because your midheaven is in... No, I'm sorry, a little bit later. And the reason for that is that your midheaven is in the 29th degree of Aquarius. But what I often see you putting out into the world, lately at least, is very much about this idea of like the all-encompassing self, feelings, you know, like who am I, and also what are the secrets of the world, like what is going on beneath everything. And that's all very Piscean topics. But on top of that, it's also quite possible, because of how fast the ascendant moves, that you may have had your midheaven like right where Neptune is, or right where Jupiter is, or something like that, because you would have this contact, especially Jupiter, because when we have a Jupiter contact to our midheaven, the midheaven is the highest point in the chart. And so it often represents the way in which we are seen by the world and how our products are seen by the world. So it could either be that your birth time is like, your midheaven is 20 degree, or I don't think that would work, actually. So it wouldn't be over by Neptune. It's probably just a little bit later near Jupiter. In any case, I love that Jupiter is in Pisces as well, because it's, again, this element of like drugs and, you know, like experiences that are like unifying, symbolic, divine, stuff like that. Wow. Okay. I mean, it's all right here. It's pretty crazy. Let's see. What are you seeing, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, really, the same things are standing out to me. It's really interesting that in both the natal chart and the transit chart that we have here, we see so much of the themes that came up around this, you know, recent stint. You've had QC as the main character of Twitter. I see so much in both places about money and spirituality and struggling with your emotional life and struggling with love and attachment and like control and all of these coming up and being explored, especially through like rebellion or idealizing or breaking into a different realm of consciousness. Like all of these like strategies have been at play, both as like things that were motivating you to write your tweet thread, and also things that tend to motivate you in general. And I've seen that for sure, like in the time that I've known you, that there is kind of like a pattern of trying on a new ideal, trying to break out of a frame completely, even if you're like landing somewhere that's delusional or crazy or whatever. And then if none of that works, just like rebelling against wherever it is you ended up, and then starting that again. So it's really funny to see that Neptune-Uranus co-presence with Saturn interacting with this Jupiter-Venus conjunction in the second house, and then having it activated by those same kind of planets in the transits it's such a fun thing for us to do, I think, speaking for Sal a bit here. But it feels like there is no way, like from a scientific materialist perspective, that like we should be able to get you know, the 100K acid baby on ASTROPILLED, and we'll find like the most quintessential money
like ambivalence in both his chart and the transit of the moment of the tweet. Like, there's no way that should happen. And it is like not just clear as day, it's like self-redundant. It's all over.
It's like there's no night anymore. It's that clear. Like, yeah, I look for this. I
this
also
super.
Go ahead.
Can I reflect?
Yeah.
So the thing that this brings up for me is like my experience of what felt like the proper timing for doing all this stuff. Like I don't remember if I mentioned this in the thread, but I set an intention to start thinking about money stuff and like learning about my relationship to money stuff in like January-ish. And then I just sat on it for a long time because it was too scary. It just wasn't the right time. And like the two decisions that I made here, first the decision to drop the acid and the second decision to write the thread, which happened several days apart, were like, I made both of those were sort of a little bit on a whim. Like I didn't think through either of those decisions in very much detail. Like the decision to drop the acid was like a 10-second whim. I was like, I'm so bored and I want something to change, and acid can help me with that problem. Yeah. It was just a day when I was like stuck in an Airbnb and I moved in and everything was just like boring and terrible, and I was like, okay, I have no idea what to do with my life. I'm gonna drop some acid.
Yeah.
And I didn't even go into that experience with a strong intention to look at money stuff specifically. I was just like, what is going on in my life and what can I do about it? And money just ended up being the place that I went. Like, yeah. So in that experience, I guess I would describe it as like I followed some kind of thread of like, I guess you could call it intuition. Intuition is a very loaded word, I guess, but like it wasn't a thought out decision. It's just like sniffing around, and like I'm gonna go here for a while, and then I sat on the thread for a couple of days. I was like, it doesn't feel like the right time to talk about this. I considered it during the thread during the trip. I was like, what if I live tweeted this? And it didn't feel right. I was like, I'm going to sit on this for a couple of days, and then the day that I actually wrote about it, like I didn't think about that decision very much either. I was just like, okay, let's do it. And so it from my perspective of trying to sort of make sense of the relationship between that and the astrology is like, I don't know what influenced those whims of mine. Like I don't have very much access to that. It just didn't feel like the right time, and then it felt like at the right time. And there's a lot of space in that, like feeling in the like whatever it was that was causing it to feel like the right time. Like I simply don't know, and it's very interesting to me to contemplate what goes into when it feels like the right time to do things. I don't know.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I would say it's definitely that sun, because, you know, if we can wheel it back a little bit, you know, and take a look and say, like, because before that moment, sure, you had Venus, you had Mars on your sun, but it wasn't exact yet. You know, it was coming up to it. And then you also had the sun at 20 degrees of Chiron. And I'm sure if we look through this, we could find something that would indicate like your whim to take this acid trip. You know, we might have to use some more fine grained techniques to really like nail that in, or it might be there if we look at the exact day.
I'd be curious.
Yeah. So do you know when you dropped it?
I should know. I usually take notes on my trips. So if I'm lucky, then I indicated the time in one of two possible places. And if I'm really lucky, it'll be down to the minute.
Nice.
We're down to like the 5 minutes or something. Because
I bet it was around the 10th, because that's when we had a new moon in your second house right on top of your Chiron.
It was a few days before the tweet, but I'd have to nail the timing a little more carefully. Feel free to move on while this might take a minute or two.
Yeah, no worries. So just to continue to comment on this, I really love the fact that also Pluto was right up in your business in your 8th house again, right around this time as well of the tweet. Like if you look at the 15th precisely, it's actually very close to an opposition with your progressed Chiron. And Pluto will tend to force us to dig deep into the issues of whatever is there. It's almost like this compulsive need to transform something and to change it and to mold it, you know? So like, I really like that. I saw one other thing, but I lost it. Oh yes, so there is an element too of the blow up, of the fact that like you went super viral with this, because one of the things that sometimes is delineated for the node is interactions with the public. So what's actually happening here is your progressed Mars, which moves very slowly, by the way. It would have taken a long time to get to this point, like basically your entire life, to move 16 degrees and 30 minutes is how long it took. But the moment on the day, it was within 5 minutes by progression of a trine with your north node blow up, explosion, you know? And then it's also like, it makes sense because Mars in general is this aggressive initiating action that like starts things, it kicks things off, and by progression it's especially powerful. But you also have a double whammy in that it is on your moon, and you have the actual node approaching your Mars there and your moon as well. So it's like you have this double signification of some sort of blow up. And that's often a rule in astrology when you're doing predictive work, which is that if you're looking to find and predict a specific major event, you need a rule of 3. We only got 2. There's probably a 3 in there somewhere. But I love the fact with progressions, because progressions are really kind of like the primers of this entire dynamic. So were you able to find that acid drop date?
I have the time now.
Let's take a look.
So within 10 minutes, between on Sunday, July 11th. Yeah, Sunday, July 11th, between 4 and 4:15 p.m. Pacific.
Okay, so I think the time doesn't really matter too much, honestly.
Sure.
So we can, because I think we're actually using as a location your birthplace, so it's going to be off a little bit. But let's see. So yeah. Oh, that's funny. So this was right around the time when you had, so your sun was approaching your Chiron. You had the moon right on top of your Jupiter here. So like that's a pretty good ping of like, and this is on your progressed Jupiter. So it could be a ping of like, oh, the moon, we just had a new moon in the second house. It was essentially kind of setting up this story for you. And then as the moon transited into Mars and touched your Venus as well as your Jupiter, that is when all the money stuff came into being, most likely. But overall, I would say that the contact to Jupiter is probably the place in your chart where you had this sensation of like, oh, like I want to have this expansive experience. You know, I want to have this experience that is all encompassing, that makes me feel, you know, growth in the world. That's Jupiter overall. So I think that totally makes sense. What else? Oh, yes. So another thing that was very interesting is that you actually had an eclipse that happened right on your moon on May 26th. So we can see that right here. And the principle essentially is that when an eclipse happens, it turns that placement. If an eclipse happens on one of your natal placements within like 2 to 3 degrees, that placement becomes activated for the same number of hours that the eclipse was happening, translated into years. So generally that works out to about 2 to 4 years, depending. But yours was absolutely active. It only happened like 2 months ago. So we had the node come around and contact your moon right here. And this was when you dropped acid. And then just a little bit further, it got even closer. And you also had Mars coming over. So you have this proximity to this really, really important placement. And then generally with these larger placements, you can use an orb, imagining it like an energetic reserve is building up. Or I kind of liken it to like putting barrels in a stock room of like full of oil and flammable stuff. And then another transit comes around, like this moon or this pile up on top of your sun or on top of your Chiron, and then that's the fire. That's the match that lights the fire, essentially. Okay. So like, even though it's not exact, you might still count it. But I mean, frankly, given how this works, I would expect you to have more events related to this story. I don't know why my solar fire is lagging right now. That's weird. Let's see. But I would expect you to have some events whenever the node conjuncts your progressed Mars, most likely, but also whenever it moves around and conjuncts your moon, exactly, or probably, you know, within 30 minutes is usually what I use, around September 13th, September 14th, or just the general September area. So I'll be very curious to hear what happens, because this will also be the time that you're having a progressed solar return. what else would be happening around this time? We would have Venus here. Okay, you would have a square to your Venus, so that's a repetition of this money story. It's like an elaboration because actually, you know, what you had happening before this time, around July 1st, 2021, is just prior, you would have had a Venus return. And around the end of June, a Venus return is going to manifest as a cycle for you around money topics. So like you literally just started this journey, you know, like the big thing happened, but this is the beginning for you. And I really like that.
Okay.
Another element that's interesting to this story is that despite all the hate you got, for you, it was a fairly positive event. You know, like you experienced it in a really productive way and you got a lot out of it. And I think that's reflected by your transits as well, because you've got Venus there, you've got the sun there, you've got Mars there, which is kind of working as your friend. At least it's softened by its combination with Venus. Yeah, I mean, this entire period is fascinating to look at.
So September, something interesting happens in September. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe, are you seeing anything else here? I know we're running up at the end of time, so if we can go a little further, that's good for me, if it is with y'all as well.
Sure, yeah. Totally.
Okay, cool. Maybe I'll kick it over to you.
Yeah, the only other things that I'm seeing in this chart for the medium dose of acid is that Mars is also approaching a conjunction with the natal sun, and so that might have especially because the natal Mars is in the 12th house, like had themes around spirituality and self-development and like getting past things in your conscious awareness as well. And another thing that resonates with that wouldn't like show up explicitly in the chart is that Mercury would have been within the last day or two of the shadow of its last retrograde. So in a sense, your mental life might have been kind of like just shaking off the last of a sort of 3-week long nap. And that might have primed you for some sort of, consciousness traveling, like I don't know how mercurial language would adapt to the acid trip and the astral realm and all of that kind of stuff, but it felt like it's like that's a time when Mercury might have felt ready to explore a really altered way of thinking or communicating with themselves and all of that kind of things. Whereas in the few weeks leading up to it, you probably wouldn't have been feeling quite ready because the retrograde would have still been in effect or just having ended. So you'd still be in the thick of the shadow of it.
Yeah, and given the fact that you are likely a Gemini rising, I do think that's probably correct. You will most likely be very tuned into the cycle of Mercury as well. So like the cycle of Mercury as it retrogrades, as it stations, as it goes direct, as it's in the shadow, as it reaches its maximum elongation and the conjunction with the sun, all those things are periods where you might pay attention to and think, oh, I wonder what's happening with my brain. I wonder if I'm moving into a new stage or into a new phase at this moment. So I think that's a great call out. Maybe I love that. So to come home and to wrap up, I'd love to return to the chart, to your natal chart, and just take it in for a moment and ask, is there anything else you'd like to touch on or anything you're curious about, QC, here?
About my own chart?
Yeah, or your experience or how you relate to it or any of the stuff that we've talked about.
Sure. I mean, so this stuff is very interesting, and I'm grateful to you all for sharing it with me. It's funny to me that you talked a lot about Venus, and I would have guessed that Venus was associated with like romantic love, that sort of thing, and we didn't talk about that sort of thing at all. And obviously, I'm very curious for anything you have to tell me about that.
Yeah, totally.
The guy wants to know these things.
Yeah. So I did not touch on Venus mostly because it is so loud as a money indicator. It indicates both things. It indicates typically what we value, and often the way in which that's tuned into is romantic and sexual value. But So what I would see here is that Venus in combination with Jupiter is overall very good. You also have your seventh house will represent your partners, and it will be, as it's in Sagittarius, it's ruled by Jupiter. So the fact that you have your romance planet combined with the thing that has to do with partnership and other people, it conjunct Jupiter, is that generally speaking, you'll probably do well with long-term partners. They'll be a source of growth and joy for you. It's likely that they'll also come from a background of success because of the double involvement of both Jupiter and Venus. Overall, I would say you can look at transits to your Jupiter and Venus, or whenever Jupiter and Venus are contacting stuff in your own chart personally as well. Let's see. You are in the seventh house. No, I won't bother with perfections right now. Maybe, what are you seeing?
One thing that I noticed is that Venus is in Leo, co-present with the Sun, so the ruler of the sign is in the sign with it. So I would imagine that creativity and value and romance and all of that kind of stuff is more prominent for you in your life, in particular in the way that you see yourself and conceive of your own identity, than it might be relative to other people's charts. Another thing that I think about it with is that it is right on that 0 degree of Leo. So if this birth time is accurate enough that's a placement that wouldn't shift, that you might be a more intense Leo, like the significations of that sign might show themselves in a more like stereotypical way with you than with other people. Some things that stand out to me is like the way that you talk about having crushes. And you have a lot of like gifts and words of affirmation, and you're very generous with them, and that wanting to just totally shower other people with affection, but then also like you're with Venus and the Sun co-present, you give people what you want, and when you're so happy when you find people who you can like engage in this reciprocity with, where you can mutually give each other all of this affection and support, and that is the ideal that I see with Venus and the Sun co-present in Leo. And then also that it's in the third house highlights for me that how do I put this, like the intellectual connection, the ability to communicate your experiences and your needs, and your ability to connect and travel together and socialize with each other's friends. Like those are all things that I would imagine being really important to you in a relationship as well. And that sort of speaks to part of the way that the person that you would choose to be your partner in that role, in that kind of role in your life, would be a big part of not just the way that you conceive of yourself, but the way that you think about things in general. Like I imagine that when you have somebody in your life that's filling that role, you think about them a lot and your mind turns to them often. I feel like there was something else that I was noticing a lot on this note as well. Do you have any reflections? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So probably the last thing I'd note also on this is that typically, well, I'm going to talk about compatibility and the types of people you might want to look for. So typically, the ascendant and the descendant will represent one of the placements of a long-term partner that we have, because it's so essential to our personality and to our being. So it wouldn't surprise me if you find somebody who has a big 3 or a lot of either Gemini or Sagittarius in their chart. But overall, you'll also do well with somebody who has a fair amount of earth in their chart, a fair amount of fire, and maybe some water, or fire, air, and less water or less earth, because you are predominantly excuse me, predominantly your big three are in fire and air, which are two signs that get along very well. They don't get along so well with earth and water, and that's also represented in our own charts. We can have these conflicting dynamics of energy that don't really work for us, or we have to work out, So this other person is probably going to have some similar combinations to you, in that they'll have a likely more fire or earth big three, and then possibly fire and air big three, and water and earth for the rest of the stuff. Generally, you can also note kind of the way that relationships often come to you by the placement of the descendant, as well as its ruler's placement. So in the seventh, with having Sagittarius there, you're likely to be attracted to or to encounter people who are involved in more egalitarian pursuits, who like to travel a lot, who enjoy traveling abroad, who are very high-minded, interested in, religion, philosophy, government, stuff like that. That's all Sagittarian themes. And with your Jupiter in your second house, it's also going to indicate that often, you might literally meet somebody like Cancer, so memories, the past, in the house of possessions. You might meet somebody at a garage sale, or you might meet somebody at a fundraising event or something like that, or an estate sale. Who knows? That sort of stuff can sometimes happen in a very, very literal way. It's not necessarily how it's going to play out, but that's often what will happen, which is pretty funny.
Garage sale.
Well, cool. So, QC, do you have anything else you'd like to comment on or ask about? Otherwise, I think we can close this out.
I think I'm okay. That was cool. That was cool to hear about garage sales. All right.
Yeah. Anything that has
some of those.
Yeah. I mean, whenever it's possible, right? But I mean, anything that has to do with the things that we have, possessions and places associated with that, or organizations, it's probably more likely for you to meet somebody along those avenues. Not to say that's exclusively how it's going to happen, but if it happens, I absolutely want to hear about it.
Sure.
Yeah. So thank you so much, QC, for sharing your life with us, letting us stare at your chart, pick apart a very intense event in your life, and put it under this view. You could spend multiple hours on multiple sessions just looking at a single chart, and we only had time to focus in on a few of the things and a few of the manifestations that we could see in your chart. But I feel like we got a lot. Thank you so much. Thank you, viewers, for being here. And I think we can call ASTROPILLED number 9 a wrap.
Great. Yeah, thank you guys so much.
Yeah, thanks, y'all. All right, I'm going to close the stream down now. Bye, everybody.